right, gang. So I think I'm going to start a timer here. All right, good evening. So I'm Aaron. I can appreciate you guys wanting to come in here tonight and have a conversation, or at least hear me have a conversation about basically what life can be like and how it can get tough and really complicated and what you can do about it, what should you do about it, and how can you handle it. So the title of this is When All Hell Breaks Loose, right? So you guys today, well, before I get there, I'll give you guys a little bit of background about me. So I work in town here as a therapist. My actual title / license is that I'm a marriage and family therapist. I work with a lot of kids, so under the age of like 10, and I work with a lot of, let's say, preteens and teenagers up through high school. So I kind of wear a couple different hats because in one sense I'm working with the kids and the teens, but then I also try to bring their parents and their families in to kind of process through things that come up in our sessions. So a host of different things can be discussed. Some of it I'm like, not going to talk about with their parents. Some of it I'm like, let's talk about it because it seems like it's a family issue. So I try my best to kind of balance both worlds, but what I've learned over the past few years at least is that you guys, represented in this room tonight as teens and maybe preteens, have a lot going on. So if I can get a show of hands, just so I have a ballpark, how many of you guys in this room are in high school? Okay, wow, very, very split, right? Like one side of the room to the other. All right, so fair enough. So you guys have a lot of experiences and a lot of different things going on. So I grew up in the area here. I grew up about a half an hour south of Point. I graduated from UWSP, and then I went and I moved to Minneapolis about 5-6 years ago. I moved to Minneapolis where I went to grad school. And then the last year and a half or so that I lived there, I worked for an agency called Teen Challenge, which is drug and alcohol recovery for people of any age, but specifically I worked with 15 to late teenage, early 20-year-old males. So the one thing that I learned very quickly is how complicated their lives were when they were a lot younger. So I may have been working with them when they were 16, 17 as a result of their drug addiction, but a lot of bad stuff happened when they were like 8. And they didn't know how to cope with that or how to deal with that, and they ended up started use drugs when they were like 12, 13, somewhere in that range, and it just continually got out of control. So this is something that I just heard the other day. Maybe you guys heard this. There was a statistic that came out from the Center for Disease Control that Wisconsin is the #1 state in the country for opioid use, right? Our percentages have gone up like 170%, primarily teenagers, right? So this isn't about drug use or anything like that. So, but there's a reason for that, right? There's a reason that more people are using drugs. There's a reason that life seemingly is harder, right? And so that is the purpose of this discussion tonight, is just to be able to say, for you guys that are experiencing things that I don't understand fully, I've been out of high school for 15 years. The world is completely different today in what you guys deal with than what I had to live with 15 years ago. And that, to me, that's just crazy of how quickly things have changed. When I was in high school, we did not have Wi-Fi. We didn't, right? Like the iPhone has only been around for 10 years. So the whole world has changed so much in literally a decade. I can't even imagine what it's going to be like 10 years from now, much less what you guys or teenagers are going to have to go through at that time. So when they asked me if I would come and talk to teenagers about what to do or how to handle life, I'm like, absolutely. Like, this is a phenomenal opportunity. One thing, at the end, I say if you have any questions, feel free to raise them, ask them. You don't feel obligated to. Like, don't feel like, oh, I need to come up with a question or I really need to have something. But if you have questions, bring them up to your small group leader when you're done here. Grab me, like there'll be some moments where I'll talk about that more here coming up too. But just if you're going along and you get a question or you're like, hey, this is something good, jot it down or, put it in your mind, because at the end, feel free to ask that question. So there are some common issues that come up with teens. So the big things that I've seen or that I've experienced are depression, anxiety, stress. These, honestly, I've heard some of these stats, and your generation, teenagers today, experience anxiety like no other generation in the history of the world. And I'm like, no way, right? The history of the world, like a lot of bad stuff has happened in the history of the world. Like, how can this be, right? Like, that you guys have more stress, more anxiety, and more depression. And I think, what I attribute it to at least, is just how quickly you guys get information. Not just you guys, we all get it, right? Like, I have a smartphone, right? Like, I can get anything about anything at any point in time where I have cell service, right? So why wouldn't that cause more stress and anxiety? Because we're not, shielded from it. We're exposed to it every minute of every day. We'll talk more about this in a second too, but half show of hands, how many of you have a cell phone in your room with you when you go to sleep at night? All right, wow, almost everybody. Okay, so basically, 24 hours a day, you have that with you at all times and can access anything, right? So no wonder, right, that we're exposed to things, we see things, it's going to be there. A few things that have come out of it. Anger. We struggle in our culture today to express our emotions in a healthy way. So what tends to happen is we believe, for whatever reason, that there is a healthy emotion, quote-unquote healthy emotion, that is, I'm mad, because crying is a sign of weakness. So instead of dealing with the emotions as it is, whether it's embarrassment, whether it's sadness, whether it's jealousy, whether it's whatever, we just get mad, right? For us in our culture, we've learned over the last, let's say, 30 or 40 years that that's the healthy way to cope with things. It's not, right? It's not at all. We're not actually coping anything. We're just expressing ourselves. So anger and being able to regulate our emotions and feelings are two big things that have really come out of all of this stress, anxiety, depression. Self-harming behaviors, cutting, burning, different things that we do to turn when life is hard. So we've developed some coping skills, and we're going to talk more about those in a little bit too. Some of the things that are more difficult, fear. So we are afraid of things today, I think, as a result of some of the mass social media technology, is we have fears. So I worked with an 8-year-old, so I know a lot younger than everybody in the room here, but about 6-8 months ago, I worked with an 8-year-old. He was deathly afraid of going to school. He'd get to school, his mom would drop him off, he would have a meltdown in the parking lot. So I started working with him, like, what's going on? And his fear was 100%, someone's going to kill my mom while I'm at school. You're 8. Holy moly. Like, that is insane. He attributed it, his actual thing was, when I'm at school, ISIS is going to kill my mom. And I'm like, holy smokes, like, Mom, turn the TV off. Like, don't let him watch the news. Like, that's not okay. But fear is more prevalent today than I think ever, not because the world is scarier, because there's always been bad stuff, but because we know about it. Your, let's say, grandparents, great-grandparents, World War II, right, 1940s, they didn't know. Like, they had no idea what was going on over in Europe and in the Pacific. No clue, right? Because we didn't have 24-hour news stations or social media, right? So they were shielded from it. Today, you get it in real time whenever you want it. So there's a lot of fear. Trauma is another big thing, right? So a lot of you in this room and a lot of your friends have experienced traumatic situations. So what do I mean by trauma? Just really bad stuff has happened to them, and they don't know how they're going to cope with that, handle it, or move forward with it. right? Maybe it's a death of a parent, a death of a loved one. They're in a situation where they've been abused in some way, they've been in an accident, something's happened to them, and now they're in a situation that they're like, what do we do, right? Again, that all contributes to this shift, I think it's a shift at least, in the stress and anxiety and depressed mood that is really within each of your lives. The theme for tonight, I didn't realize this until I got here, so there seems to be like this camping theme, okay? So as you're walking around, there's, like even outside this store I saw, like there's the duffel bags, right? People use when they go camping, or the backpacks. I like to consider each of these things, these issues, these common issues, as being like each of them being a backpack. You guys each have more than one backpack. Like you keep filling it up with stuff, right? Whether it's anxiety, it's worries, it's shame, it's guilt, it's worthlessness, it's whatever, right? We fill up our bags and we carry them around with us. We all have them, we all do it. And at a certain point, that bag is going to get too heavy, or those bags are going to get too heavy, and you have two options. Either you're going to be knocked over because the weight is so much, or you have to drop some of the bags so you can keep on the journey. So as we're going along tonight, as we're talking through some of this, that maybe just have that as a bit of a metaphor, as saying, what's all in my bag? Like, what am I carrying around with me? Because life is hard. So what contributes to this? So we've talked a little bit about social media, but I like to call these and refer to these things as wounds. We have a series of wounds that happen in our lives. Everyone has them. Everyone has some levels of wounds, right? They're different maybe for a lot of people, but everyone's got stuff. So what can make this up? So I have some categories here. So stress at home, okay? For a lot of you in this room, some of these stressors are all too real, right? Parents are divorcing or have recently divorced. There is a situation where they're constantly fighting, right? Your parents are constantly fighting, and you lay awake at night and you hear them just going at it downstairs or somewhere else in your house. It's stressful. If they've recently divorced, teenagers, maybe you get a choice as to who you live with. That's hard, right? Like, who the heck do you pick? Like, how do you win in that situation? Financial stuff, right? It's a huge reason why marriages fall apart, and a huge reason for stress in general is finances. So maybe it's a situation where one or both of your parents has recently lost a job, and you're feeling it. Maybe you've been asked, maybe explicitly or not explicitly, to get a job so you can help pay the bills. I worked with a 14, 15-year-old about a year ago. He was in that situation. Had to kind of quit all after-school activities so he could get a job, I don't know, at McDonald's or something, so he could give his paycheck to his parents to help pay the bills. Tough stuff. I mean, that's really hard. So these are some of the stressors that go on there. Physical, emotional, sexual abuse. I would venture to guess that a lot of you in this room know somebody that's been impacted by one of those things. That's heavy, right? Because that's something really bad happening at home. All real life stuff that is dealt with teenagers today. Then how do we cope with that? Maybe you don't feel loved. You don't feel loved, or you've explicitly been told we don't want you. Maybe you feel that. Maybe nobody said that to you, bluntly, but maybe you feel that at home. No one even wants me here. What's the big deal? So those are some of those pieces of home stress. Peers, right? So the next layer would be peers and your relationships with friends, dating relationships. How do you handle bullying or just trying to manage having a relationship in school? the capabilities of how things are shared today is vastly different than what it was 10 years ago. Pictures can be exchanged and shared with everybody without you even knowing it. That's a big thing. A lot of that impacts your life not only today, but it will impact it for years to come. So if you are told, let's say as a kid, let's say you're 8 years old, and you're told that you are fat, you're ugly, you're worthless, that's going to stick with you for a long time. I have adults, honestly, I have adults that meet with me now on a regular basis that 30, 40, 50 years ago, they were told whatever. And it's impacted them to such a degree that today, they're still working through those same issues. How do we get over that hump of thinking that we are good enough? We are better than. We're not worthless. We're not stupid. We're not ugly. Right? All real things that you guys have to deal with. Technology and social media, we've talked about that a little bit, right? Like, you guys are exposed to things now that, honestly, people weren't exposed to 15, 20, 30 years ago. It's every day at your fingertips. School. So this is a big one, I think, especially for you guys that were in high school that raised your hand, right? The pressure for academics, I think, is probably greater today than any time ever. College prep, tests, exams, like all of this stuff, it's a lot of weight to carry, right? That's a big bag on its own of being like, if I don't do well on this, I'm never going to get into college, which means I'm never going to get a career, which means I'm going to be homeless living in a van down by the river, right? I mean, whatever, however far we take that. But the pressures are there for that to say, wow, what do we do? Like, how do we get through that? Like, it's hard. So we have, for better or worse, we have come up with a lot of Band-Aids to cover these wounds. So, drugs, alcohol, sex, porn, anything that can be used to make your life better for a little bit of time. Self-harming behaviors, right? Cutting, burning, generally speaking, very general, is that females tend to cut themselves. Males will tend to burn themselves because it's more masculine. Okay. But it's all kind of in the same boat of saying, look, it hurts so bad, whatever I'm going through, these wounds hurt so bad that I would rather cut myself just to make that pain go away, that emotional pain go away for a few minutes. So we've developed these coping skills, these Band-Aids, so that we can feel better. Sometimes it goes further than that, though, right? Like, sometimes it gets to the point where we say, or we hear people say, my life isn't even worth living anymore. That's hard. Because it's to such a degree that they can't really work through whatever these are, and we've reached a place where we're like, it's just not worth it. So that's usually where I come in, right? Usually, and generally speaking, I get called by either parents, sometimes by the teen themselves, and they say, something's really wrong. I'm having these feelings that I don't want to have. I'm thinking these thoughts I don't want to think. And I don't like what's happened. I don't like what I've become. And that's when it's really important for myself, I mean, I'll speak for myself, to be invited into that story, right? And to be just in that situation where it's like, wow, this is hard. And there just needs to be a safe place where people can process through that without this fear or this shame or anything that could come with that. Why is this important? So, again, I'm going to ask for a show of hands, right? And there's, again, no wrong answers. Oh, this isn't even up here. There's no wrong answers. How many people in this room feel as though or know somebody that is going through a really hard circumstance? Okay. So virtually all of you. So tomorrow when you're back at school and you are walking down the hallway and you see all of your peers and all of your friends, just know if either they or someone they know is going through a really hard circumstance, really hard stuff. One of the really, I'll call it a great thing, but one of a really the good things that I think has happened within our culture is that these conversations can be had now without all of the shame and guilt and everything that's come with it. There is a time not long ago, like literally, this has all changed in the last maybe 10 years, but there has been a lot of history of people not being able to talk about bad stuff in their life. So some of your grandparents, I'll guesstimate grandparents, this is doing the math in my head, but I'm going to guess that some of your grandparents served maybe in Vietnam, like the Vietnam War. They probably don't talk about it much. So those type of situations happened. Those soldiers came back from active duty, and it was, you don't talk about what you saw, you don't speak to anybody, and you certainly don't show emotion because guys don't cry. So they bottled it all up, right? Really, they have post-traumatic stress, but they don't talk about it because as a culture then, in the 70s and on, it was don't talk about it. It'll get better. It'll get better on its own. It doesn't. But now today, in 2018, we have our culture's changed. And there's not the shame or the guilt or the stigmas that come with it of being like, I can't talk about this. Like they can talk about it. There's largely, it's not everywhere, but largely I think we've reached a place as a culture where we can say, I have depression, or I have anxiety, or I have PTSD because something happened to me when I was a kid. And it's okay. It's okay to seek the help that we need. As you guys just did, right? Literally, every single one of you said, I know somebody that's going through a really hard time. Maybe has a lot of really big wounds. We know them. They're in our lives. Maybe they're talking to us about it. And then that raises some new questions of what do we do with it? Like, what the heck do we do when somebody tells us that something happened or is happening or is thinking some stuff? So these are questions, and we'll kind of get to those here in a little bit, but what I want to cover is kind of why this is important, and I've touched on a little bit, but and you can totally see from the last session, but that's okay. So I have my 3 selves that I use. So we have self-esteem, self-respect, and self-confidence. And these 3 things combined create your self-worth. Okay. So why is this important? This is important because what this turns into is how you can, so I should touch on this too. So this is how you view yourself. What this turns into is if you can love yourself, right? So self-compassion. Or self-love. And you're like, okay, big whoop, right? So let's say you have some wounds. These wounds will impact how you view yourself, which will directly impact whether you love yourself. So let's say you're in a situation where from an early age you came to believe, whether somebody said it to you explicitly or not, that you weren't good enough. that there was something wrong with you, whatever. This view of yourself became very skewed, right? Like, your self-perception is now, there's something wrong with me. And instead of self-love, this is self-hate. So when I start working with teenagers, specifically, I will focus on this. Like, I spend a ton of time just focusing on self-esteem, self-respect, self-confidence, kind of in that order. Because usually I can hear the story and I can start to see where things start to break down. There might be a lot of wounds. There might be a lot of bad stuff that took place. Might be one of my guys that I worked with at Teen Challenge that at the age of 8 was being sexually abused by his stepfather, which turned into a whole host of problems here, and there was no love, right? Might be something as simple as when I was a kid, I was told that I was ugly or that I was fat. This has definitely impacted. And again, there's no self-love there. It's clearly I'm horrible. So this becomes incredibly important for teens because this will shape their lives. As I said, I have adults that come in and are still working through these same issues. And when we talk about them, we're going back to when they were 13 years old or younger. It's significant, right? It's a huge impact on their life. So it's just a matter of being aware of where this stuff comes from, how we view ourselves, our self-perception is all incredibly significant. So what can we do to address these things? So if you don't leave here tonight with anything, if you ignore all of this, that's fine, whatever. But if you don't leave, if you haven't been listening, now's a great time to tune in. So why, or what can we do, right? We know why it's important. We know kind of what it makes it up. But what can we do about it? And that can be a really hard thing to process through. So the first thing is not being afraid to talk about it. I think that's probably the most monumental piece. Because if we live in a little bubble that we create for ourselves that says we can never talk about it, we can never share this, that's just going to isolate us. I grew up, like I said, a half an hour south of here. I grew up in a really small church. Our youth group, literally, was 6 or 7 people, all right? One of which was my sister. So, wasn't doing a lot of sharing, right? Like, because I saw the other 4 or 5 people every week or even every day in some cases. So, when I became a teenager and when I got into high school and stuff, I don't think now, as I look at my life, I don't think that there was an environment or an opportunity for me to talk about stuff. I wish there was. Honestly, I wish that there was an opportunity to be like, hey, let's process as a group of what the stressors of life are. Because it's vital, because as we just saw, every single one of you is exposed to it. Whether it's directly or indirectly, you're exposed to the same stuff, that life is hard. Everyone's got these big bags. They're carrying them around. And it's like, now what? So you guys can share that experience. You can be like, oh yeah, been there, done that. This is what I did. There's also coping skills. So at the door, for sure this door, I think it's only this door, there is this half sheet. Feel free to take one. So on one side is things to do when you're feeling depressed. Anything from drinking a cup of hot tea to calling a friend, right? There's probably 50 things on here or more of things that people can do, right? Grab a couple. There's a big stack back there. On the other side is how to cope with anxiety. Like how to cope with stress. So anxiety, I guess that kind of sounds a little technical, but anxiety would be worrying, right? Like what are things that we're worrying about? What are things that we're stressing about? Might be something as simple as, because at some level, anxiety is good, right? At some level, anxiety is good. So we say, I have a test tomorrow. I haven't studied for said test. I am anxious because we feel that anxiety. That's I think, healthy, because it says, boy, I need to do something. It's Wednesday night. I need to do something, so I'm ready for that test. It can go way too far, where it comes to a place where it's like, I am worrying about everything. Like my routine day, I am worrying about, like, who am I going to sit by at lunch? And I mean, it can get to big pieces where maybe, like another example, I worked with a freshman in high school, would throw up every single morning at just thinking about going to school. Every day. I mean, we could map his routine of being like, you're going to wake up at this time, you're going to get ready, you're going to throw up, you're going to get ready again, and you're going to go to school, right? And it was every day. And so, you know, I was just one member of this team, right? There was like a medical team, you know, he had a doctor and stuff that was working with him too. But, I mean, it became a situation where it was, this is a big thing. Like, this isn't like I'm worrying about a test. Like, this is, I don't want to leave my house. I've also worked with adults that will not go shopping. They'll go to Walmart in the middle of the night because no one else is shopping in Walmart in the middle of the night. And it's, we'll go, we won't bump into anybody, there's no lines, there's no other shoppers, we're in and out. Boom, right? So there's a spectrum, we'll say, of how people deal with anxiety. Kind of the same with depression, right? If something negative happens to me, I'm going to be sad. I'm going to be bummed out. That's normal, right? If it wasn't, we might have other issues. But that can go, again, on the spectrum to the way other end of that, where it becomes my life isn't worth living because of whatever. So there's a healthy, normal component to these issues that you all experience. And then there's kind of a whole chain reaction that can happen as a result of that. Like I said before, usually where I get involved is when the chain reaction goes pretty far to the end, and it's a matter then of saying, whoa, this is pretty far, like we've gone pretty extreme. So, talking to people about it, coping skills, grab some sheets on your way out, seeking counseling. There is now, thankfully, no shame in getting counseling. It is probably the safest place that you can be to process through life. There's some limitations to it, but 98% of what you tell me legally has to stay with me. I can't tell another soul. Like I said, there's some limitations. If you're a danger to yourself or you're a danger to others, I have to report that. If you're being harmed at home, I have to report that. But if it's a matter of saying, here we are, just talking about life or things that happened, it's all got to stay right there. For a lot of people, that becomes very comfortable and healing because they don't have that fear of, if I tell them, they're going to tell her, they're going to tell him, and it's going to be all over the place by the day being done, right? So counseling is a place, and there's a lot of counselors in this town, right? I'm just one of them. But I mean, there's a place for that, to be like, I need some help. I am missing something, or something's not working right, and I need to process through it. And there's no shame. There's no issues with that. Another area, specifically, I think that would fit in well with this environment here, is seeking prayer and support. There are not a lot of places in the world or in your life where you can maybe turn to someone and be like, this is what I'm working through, this is what I'm struggling through, and they're going to pray for me. I mean, truthfully, enjoy it while you're young, because when you get out of college, a lot of those support systems start to fade away unless you're really intentional about, like, getting plugged into a group or into something at church, right? But when we look at teens and we look at young adults, college students, right? I mean, there's so much that happens in their life, so much is changing, so much is happening, that they need an outlet to say, not only can I process through what's happening, but can you pray for me too? And they can get that, right? So that would be another area. Finally, my last point with this would be is surrounding yourself with people that love you and that you love them. This is maybe one of the biggest voids that people have, because those relationships might be missing. And you're like, whoa, like, who can I talk to about this that I trust? My encouragement would be is cultivating those friendships and those relationships so that you are in a place where you're getting positive feedback. You're getting boosts from these people, whether it's through prayer, whether it's saying we're just getting coffee, no matter what it is. But you feel like you are loved by someone and that they are actively pouring into your life. So here would be a question that I've been asked, and I think it's important to bring up here, is what do you do? Because all of you raised your hands. You know somebody who's going through some tough stuff. Maybe you're going through some tough stuff. And so the question would be is, what do I do with this? Like, my best friend just came to me and told me some really big stuff. Now what? And that can be really hard, because it might be a situation where they came to you and they said, I'm going to tell you something that I've never told anyone in my life, and you have to promise me you'll never tell anyone ever again. And you're like, absolutely, tell me anything that you want. And then it's some really big thing, like something big. And you're left there like, now what? Like, I'm not supposed to tell anybody, and this is this big secret, but I think, so here would be my answer to that, because I'm sure if you haven't been in that situation, you will be one day, where somebody tells you something in strict confidence, and you're like, I don't know what to do. So if it's a situation, this would be my advice to you. If it's a situation where you feel as though they are in danger, you can't hold on to that. If somebody comes to you and says, I'm thinking about killing myself, but don't tell anyone, you can't hold on to that. I've had parents call me, and they've said, our child told us that they were thinking of doing this, but we think they're just trying to get attention. And I'm like, you got to get them to a hospital now. They're like, no, we're busy, we got that. And I'm like, look, you don't want to be on the bad end of that. Like, maybe it is just a means of, I'm saying it, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I want someone to care about me. And that could be. My personal approach, whether I'm mandated or not, is I never want to be on the bad end of that, of not taking that seriously, and then that night something happening. And the next day being like, why didn't I tell somebody? Right? Again, there's a spectrum of what they might tell you, right? If it's a matter of something of them saying, I'm in this dating relationship and whatever, right? My significant other just broke up with me. I need to vent about life. I need to process through that. Okay, be their friend. Listen to them if you want to hear it. That, not a big deal. But if it's something big, if they've been abused at home, if they're being abused at home, if there's something that happened, it becomes, I think, at least my responsibility to look out for them and to protect them. So if stuff is happening or has happened, it's my job to make sure that they're safe. I have 3 S's when I counsel with teens. I have safety, I have security, and I have success, right? And those are the things that I'm constantly evaluating. Like, are they safe? Like, are they safe at home? Are they safe wherever they're at? Are they secure? Like, are they doing all right? And then are they being set up so that they can be successful, right? And that's different for everyone, but those are the things that I have to work through. If any of those are broken, right? Like, if they're not safe at home because there's abuse going on or neglect, I can't hold on to that. I would encourage you not to hold on to that. And you're like, well, what the heck do we do? They told us in confidence. So if it's here, this would be my suggestion. If it's somebody that's in your group, if it's a friend of yours that's here, I would encourage you to talk to them and say, look, I want to be part of this story with you. I want to love on you. I want to be there for you no matter what. And because of that, I think we need to go talk to somebody else, whether it's Mike, whether it's PJ, whether it's anybody for leadership, just to be like, look, this is a tough situation, and I think we need some assistance. Something that I do, like I said, I'm mandated, right? So like if bad things happen, I have to report it. But what I tend to do is if it's a gray area, like maybe I don't know. Like maybe I don't know, they tell me something, and I'm like, I don't know if this is reportable, if it's not reportable. I mean, I have to call protective services. But I will make it a pretty vague story. So I'll be like, this is Aaron King, I'm calling, I'm a therapist, I just met with a teen. Right now it's anonymous, but here's what they told me. No names, no ages, no details. But this is roughly what they told me. Is that something that I have to report? And then they tell me, they're like, absolutely, like you have to report that so we can investigate. I would encourage you to do the same thing, right? Clearly not to CPS, right? Like that's not your job. But if you're put in a situation where somebody, when you raised your hand and you had somebody in mind, if somebody came to you and said, this is really bad, or this is really hard, or all hell is breaking loose, and you're like, I don't know what to do, that's when I would encourage you to go to your leader, to go to Mike, to go to PJ, and just be like, I don't want to give names, I don't want to give a lot of information, but this was shared with me, and this is really heavy, and I don't know what to do with it. And let them give you some feedback. You're not betraying anybody's confidence at that point. You're just kind of seeking some guidance, seeking some help, because some of that is not your, most of it's not going to be your responsibility. A lot of it probably isn't going to be PJ or Mike's responsibility. Like a lot of that they might have to report, of being like, this is what we heard, right? Because bad stuff happens, right? And you're aware of that. So here would be my last point. We have a few minutes left. I want to have a couple minutes left to do some questions at the end, but this has nothing to do with what I've been talking about. I just want you guys to know this, right? There are people in this room right now, and there are people that when you raised your hand you were thinking about, that are in a situation that when you leave here in 15, 20 minutes, you might not know what you're going home to or if home is even going to be there. You might be in a situation where you walk out of here and you check your various social media things and you see crazy stuff. Maybe it's all about you. And you're like, life just got hard. You go to school tomorrow, someone says something to you, life just got hard. Maybe it's a situation where there's been abuse in your life and you've never talked about it, you've never shared it, and you kind of became a bit of an onion and you tucked it deep inside and you're like, I'm never going to talk about it, it's not important, no one needs to know. All right. Don't leave here tonight feeling like you're all alone. There are a lot of people in this building right now that love you, and they care about you, and they care about your well-being. If it's a bad situation, if all hell is breaking loose in your life, don't go home feeling like you're all alone. Don't be in a situation where you're like, I have no one to talk to, or I feel like I have no one to talk to, and it would be better off if I was dead. Things I've heard from people your age, your peers that you go to school with. Know that you are loved. If you're in a situation where you're like, I don't know who to talk to, I'm never going to talk to PJ about this. Okay. I'm here until everybody else is gone. I don't know you. That's fine. I don't need to know you, but you can grab me and be like, something's wrong, and I need to talk about it. Because it's in this room right now, guys, right? Right now, somebody sitting around you is going through bad stuff, and they might feel like I have no one to talk to. So if that's you, you don't have to stay there. It's okay to feel that way. We've all been there at some point. It's okay to feel that way, but just don't leave here tonight without feeling like I didn't have anyone to talk to, because there's a lot of people in this building that care about you and want to help you and be there for you. So with that, I fully realize that this is not like this isn't a happy-go-lucky, like discussion. And I realize this isn't like I have lots of questions that I want to ask in front of the group. Like, I get it. Like, it can be hard because no one wants to be that one, right? If you have questions, feel free to ask them. If you don't, that's perfectly fine. It's up to you guys. It's just, I think, 10 to 9 or quarter to 9 or so. So I don't think you guys have anything after this, I don't believe. I think it's just kind of wrapping up. So feel free to head out. If you have questions, I'm going to give just 2 minutes here. If you have a question that you want the group to ask or hear, feel free to ask it. And then after a couple minutes, everyone can kind of take off or if there's no questions. But are there any questions that anyone has that you want to ask? All right, guys, I won't hold you here. Have a good evening. Stay out of trouble.